All right, good morning, everybody. Let me adjust my camera here just a little bit. All right, I guess that's not much better. Well, anyway, good morning. We have questions that the questions are not on the website, but I did get emails, so we'll start with those right now. Just two of them. Oh, well, there might be more. So Anthony was asking last week after we had the last Q&A. Anthony was asking, because I was talking about one of my students that only practice, sometimes not even a half hour a day, right? And when I say a day, I mean sometimes that would be 1 day a week. So he might have 1 half-hour practice session for the whole week. And Anthony's wondering how, with the method that I teach, how can somebody like that get all of their rudiments done? And that's not exactly how he worded it. Let me read his sentence, his question off. You mentioned a student of yours, this is Anthony, that only has 30 minutes to practice. I am curious, how can he do the trumpet pyramid in 30 minutes when there's about 12 different rudiments such as buzzing, long tones, scales, etc.? Does he do 1 minute of each? Because when I do major scales only, it takes at least 15 minutes to 20 minutes. Or am I doing too much at one time or something wrong? Can you help me with this question? Okay. And first of all, we want to distinguish here the difference between a warm-up and a routine. And it's true, if you only have 30 minutes to practice, your routine is really leaning towards a warm-up. That said, there are going to still be some benefits. You don't get as many benefits from a warm-up on the long term as you do from a routine. So, let's take this all back to the issue of familiarity. Familiarity is the cornerstone, the keystone of my teaching method. It's all about familiarity. And obviously, if you practice less, the familiarity is less. Sometimes that works in your favor if you are practicing wrong. Sometimes practicing less can actually make you a better player. I know that sounds nuts, but if you are not practicing in a productive manner, you might actually be making things worse when you practice, not better. So, but putting that aside, okay, if you have 30 minutes to practice, then my recommendation is to do a 15-minute routine. Hello, Anthony. Anthony says, hello, Eddie. I am from Las Vegas live. Now I am in Houston, freezing. Yes, it's cold today. So yes, and Anthony, I'm answering your question now. So yes, we want to split your time in half. Half of that time is on routine, half of that time is on music. And this student that we were talking about last week, he knows this, okay? And he will, if he's got 30 minutes, he will do 30 minutes of exercises. And then I mean, 15 minutes of exercise is 15 minutes of music. He knows this. Okay. Hello, Javier. So Javier says, okay, I'll get to your question when I finish with Anthony's question. It's nice to see you, Javier. I know this is a time that doesn't always work for you. So, all right. So, how do you get the rudiments done in 15 minutes? Now, let me start with the scales first, because in your question, Anthony, you say that just the scales alone takes 15 to 20 minutes. Well, this is why I teach my tonalization studies. I'm assuming Anthony, that you practice every major scale. So, and my valves are gummy because of how cold it is. Oh, I got a new dent. That's very unfortunate. Okay. So people who do all their scales in one day, in one practice session, are gonna do stuff like then they'll play the next scale up in the chromatics. And so I could see how doing that on the majors, the minors, what else, maybe you do your chromatic scale. If you're doing all of that, yes, it should take 15, 20 minutes. But I teach a system where you only do one scale per day. And maybe that's not the right word. I watched a video last night about this jazz guy who says, don't practice your scales. And this is a very popular channel on YouTube for jazz players. And he says, and it was yesterday's video, he says, don't practice your jazz, don't practice scales to learn jazz phrasing. But what he ended up doing as a demonstration of what you should do instead, in my book, is still scales. It was a very cool exercise. Very cool exercise, but as far as I'm concerned, that's a scale. So when I use the word scale, obviously it's different from what other people call scales. Okay? So anytime I'm practicing scale patterns, I call that scales. And maybe what they think is just practicing like that first example that I showed you, which technically is still a pattern. Okay, so yes, if you are doing my system, then you don't have to get all the, and in fact, you should not get all of the scales done in one day. I have a book that let me give you some background. Back when the only books I only had the physical trumpet pyramid, and I had the daily routines, and I had at that point written my Go with the Flow book, which a lot of people like. Basically a flow study etude book. Those were the only 3 books I had. And my students already that early into it, the students didn't have enough time to practice the whole routine in the daily routines book already. So what I would do is go through and tell them, instead of skipping, because this is what they were doing wrong, instead of skipping the long tones, instead of skipping the lip slurs, I didn't want them to skip any of it. The order of those exercises is important. So instead of skipping, I told them do every odd one. And then the next time you have to skip, do every even one. So for example, if let's say hypothetically you want to do all of your scales every day because you think you need to do that, then do all the ones that are a whole step apart instead of half step, right? Then go, instead of going up a half step, go up a whole step. Going up in whole steps, you will cut your time on the scales in half. Just keep track so that next time you don't do the same scales. Next time, start on D flat and E flat, F, G, and A. But you can do this with all the routines. You can cut them in half. You can cut them into a quarter. So anyway, when I found myself shortening all the routines in the daily routines book for so many students, I decided, you know what, they actually need a book of short routines. That's what Chops Express is, right? Chops Express. You get it done quickly. Okay, I grabbed this because I wanted to show it, but let me go grab another one. Okay, that's what it looks like. Chops Express. We gave it a subtitle of Daily Routines Light for Trumpet. Daily Routines Light for Trumpet, okay? So, but yes, it is possible to do a 15-minute warm-up and get everything done. And so, now, what if you only have 10 minutes to practice? Can you get the benefit of the physical trumpet pyramid and only practice for, let's say, if you're going to do 10 minutes, then maybe just warm up for a minute or two, right? So I have a routine that I call the quick warm up. And you know what? I just looked before we started. I just looked on Tiger Music. That's our online music store. And we don't have it on there. I don't know why that is. Maybe because we were selling it before as a module. And now today, what we call modules is something different. And we haven't actually even put those up yet. So yes, the short warm-up is just a 2-page. It's got all the levels of the physical trumpet pyramid, but it's 2 pages long, and you can do it in between 2 to 5 minutes. Now, the shorter the routine is, the less benefit there is. You know, another thing I disagree with this guy that I watched his video last night. He says you get no benefit from doing the same skills over and over again. That's absolutely untrue. That's absolutely untrue. But you know what? I think the difference between the way I do it and the way a lot of those other guys do it, they think they need to do every skill every day. So time is an issue with them. But I broke that box. Let's say it this way. I broke out of that box. And that's you guys have heard me talk about the accumulative method of practicing. I have this philosophy for practice that I call the the art of accumulative practice. So I probably practice a lot more than someone like that does because I don't feel compelled to get it all done in one day. I don't feel like I have to hit all these check marks every day to be successful. I hope that makes sense. So this guy was saying, these scales that I teach my students, I still play those same scales myself. What we call the tonalization studies, I still play those exercises. Now, what we sell as the tonalization studies is the first 20 of 60 patterns. Let that sink in. So for the major scales, I actually do 60 patterns, not the 20 that are in that first set. And the second and the second and third sets, we don't sell that stuff. Not yet, because I want to have, for all the different scales, the first 20 sets out for all of them published, because people need that. And it's not as necessary to have those more advanced ones. But do you see what I'm saying here? I'm still playing the same ones I prescribe to my students. It's just that I'm doing those and all these others. Now, how is that possible? Because I don't have to do it every day. This is one of the beauties of this accumulative system. I can practice all of it. So, yes, you can shrink all of this stuff down once you get this idea out of your head that you have to do all of it every day. Now, I will say, this is the main caveat. I will say this. If you are not organized with your practice time, what I'm talking about is impossible. If you are not organized with your practice time, the accumulative approach to practicing is not possible. You cannot do it. It's not something you can just keep in your head. It's not something that you can pull out your trumpet and play what you feel like playing. You absolutely must be organized to do this. You have to know. I can tell you, if you said on such and such a date, what did you practice? I can go back and I can tell you everything I practiced on that day because I log it. And because I log it, I can look at what I've done, and now I know what I need to do next. A lot of people struggle with this, right? A lot of people struggle. They sit down to practice, and a lot of people struggle in that first 10 to 15 minutes. What should I practice today? And they'll get started on something, and they'll like, no, maybe I shouldn't be practicing this. Maybe I should practice that. And what you can have with that kind of practice is a whole wasted session. A session completely a complete waste of time. And that's something I haven't experienced in decades, because I always know what I'm going to practice next. I know what I'm going to practice in the next 10 days. I know what I'm going to practice 6 months from now, because I'm organized. And the only thing that changes is how fast I get it done. If I have more practice sessions, longer practice sessions, I get the stuff done sooner. And then the last thing I want to say about this, and I've already said it, but I want to really stress this issue. If you practice less, you have less familiarity. If you practice more, you have more familiarity. And this is why people who practice more have a tendency to be better players. It's not always that way, because remember, you can practice incorrectly. And so, like, for example, when I say that I still do those same scales. So, like, for example, this is the easiest one that I teach. This is the very first one I teach the beginners. That's the very first one I teach the beginners. I still practice that exact same exercise still today. And I can do that because I don't try to do it every single day. And the benefit I get is what you do more of, you are more familiar with. So my familiarity on that exercise continues to grow over time. I become increasingly more familiar. You know, when we talk about how good we can get on the trumpet or in music in general, there are certain things that create a ceiling that you can't go past that. One of the things that there's no limit to is how familiar you can become. And familiarity, in contrast to this striving for perfection. See, I don't strive for perfection, I strive for familiarity. When you strive for perfection, you are striving for something you cannot achieve. And just think of the mental stuff that causes in your life. You are striving constantly every day for something that you cannot achieve. With my system, where you're striving for familiarity, every time you practice, you are achieving more familiarity. Mentally, imagine what that does to your state of mind. You know, there's this phenomenon when it comes to perfection. There's this phenomenon that the closer you get to perfection, the more far away it looks. It's an extremely frustrating pursuit. When we strive for perfection, we are setting ourselves up for a really big head game. When you strive for familiarity, you actually get what you're striving for. It's actually obtainable. You can reach out and grab it and take it. Imagine how much more motivating that is. When you strive for familiarity, everything you do to acquire familiarity gives you that benefit, right? If I play the same scales over and over again for how long has it been? So I made these scales up. I invented this scale system in, I think it was 1985. We're creeping up on, let me do the quick math, 20, yeah, we're creeping up on 40 years of those skills. I've been practicing those skills for 40 years. And every time I practice those skills again, I increase my familiarity. I am more and more and more familiar with that scale. That is not, so the guy that I watched his video yesterday, his general attitude is that this is not a good thing. I disagree with him entirely. Okay, let me answer some of the other questions here. I took a long time to say that. Javier has a question. Javier says, hello, Eddie. Hello. Nice to see you. I asked you this on a post, but I don't know if you already answered it. Do you have any trumpet book for beginner kids? It's for my 10-year-old nephew. He just got a trumpet. So I don't have anything. I'll tell you what I do have. I have probably what amounts to 10 different books that are not published. And the problem with the beginners is that all beginners come from a different place. There is not a single one beginner that's like another beginner. We, as we become more advanced, we become more uniform. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's how it works. That's been my experience teaching beginners. The beginners, so some of them know music, some of them don't know music, some of them have physical musculature on their mouths that is makes it easy. Some of them don't have that. Some of them have good ears, some of them don't have good ears. It really is a mixed set. And so I have a lot of materials, but then very little of it is actually published. The closest thing that I have for what you're talking about is that I have published. Like I said, I've got a bunch of this stuff on that I use. It's just not standardized. Even the range that they have when they start. Some students, when they first start, have a range. That's all they can play. And I have materials for those students. Then I have students that can play up to G. Some of them can play up to C. Then I have some students that can play in that register, but they can't play the low notes. So each one of these differences requires them to have different exercises. And it really does make it difficult to have a book, because the book, I can't imagine a book right now that would cover all of those possibilities. I can't even imagine it. Like I said, so now the one book that I do have that comes close to what you're talking about is meant for after they get through my second system. So I have these levels, right? I have materials for that absolute beginner, and then I have materials for that second level beginner. And after they're finished with the second level beginner, we have this book we call Trumpet Folk Fill in the Blank. But it really is meant for, it's like the last thing I give them before they get into that player level. So that really doesn't count for what you're talking about. So I guess the short answer is no, I don't have any materials like that. I do normally put my beginners on the first routine in the Chops Express book. They don't, even before they know how to read music, I'll put the fingerings above the notes. I have rules about that. You only put the fingerings over the first one that comes up. So like they'll have G. I'll put the fingering for G. Okay? Anyway, so I hope that answers the question. Anthony says, but will you be able to get everything in 15 minutes? Yes, you can get everything in 15 minutes. You just have to shorten the exercises and not do every single one of them. Like I said, that's why I have I'm not trying to sell you a book. You know I'm not like that. But that's what the purpose of this is so that you get all the stuff that you need in 15 minutes, right? All right. So Anthony said I saw Mr. Dotson on YouTube. He is a very fine player. Yes, he is. And he's a good friend of mine. Chops Express, this is Javier's asking. Chops Express is a savior book. Savior book. Get it if you can. Yeah, it really is. There's a guy, I actually interviewed him, and I'm editing the video so we can get that interview up. But he left a review for my book for the Chops Express. He had gone a long time without practicing, and he had a gig coming up, and he had heard that my method is great for coming back after you've had time off. So he got the Chops Express book and he used it to get himself ready in 2 weeks for this big gig he had after not playing for a long time. And so he relayed that story. He says that basically what he said was that the book does everything I say it does, that it worked for him. So, and you know what? To me, that just tickles me. I'm so glad people are getting that benefit. Javier says about the trumpet book for kids. Ideally, one with notes and fingering with the songs like Ferrajaka and things like that. So let me tell you my approach with fingerings. With the beginners, right? I have two things that I do. I want them to learn how to read. And you don't learn how to read if the fingerings are on the music. But I also want them to play music. So I have two sets. I have this set over here that has the songs. And if you would like that, I can send you a PDF of beginner songs. That I've been working on. So a lot of simplified stuff. And what I do with those songs is I'll put the fingerings above the notes that they need the fingerings for. But that's because they're learning to play songs. When we do this stuff over here, the exercises, the etudes and stuff like that, I don't allow them to put the fingerings. They have to read the notes and read the and know what the fingerings are for the note. They are not allowed to put the fingerings. And you know what? With the online stuff, since they're reading from my computer, right? Because I share a screen, I have them look at the screen and they read it. That ends up not being a problem, right? Okay, so Javier says most trumpet teachers teach someone else's method. That's true. Or teach what has worked for them. That's also true. I see this all the time in master class. Also, they confuse smart work accumulation with overloading with lots of stuff. That's true too. I agree with all that. Karen, hello Karen, nice to see you. So Karen says, I would love to hear you practice samples of the exercises in Chops Tyro, particularly the multiple tongue TK and TTK at various speeds. Mine sound awful to me. Okay, so now, yeah, let me do that first and get a stand. And I'll grab that book. I don't know if I've told you guys this before, but I actually practice the Tyro book. It's in my routine. This is, we said this earlier, right? I actually practice this easy stuff. This is not just beginner. It's and in fact, my beginner stuff. So the only beginner one I don't do is the Pioneer, because the Pioneer, my highest routine that I do is enough levels away from the Pioneer one that it doesn't fall in my rotation. I hope that makes sense. So this is an exercise that I do about once a week. It ends up being less than that. So I actually changed how I do these rotations now. Based on that familiarity concept, and maybe in the future I might update my book so that it reflects this change that I'm doing. Maybe not, because the old way of doing it is good too. Okay? But the end result is I don't play this. None of the routines do I do every week anymore unless I'm practicing every day. Then it ends up being every week. Okay. All right. So this is what it sounds like when I do it. And then I want to demonstrate what it sounds like if someone's struggling. Okay. Okay, let me get the rhythm right. So, um, okay, that's the first one. I'm not going to do all of them, but I'll do number 3 and number 4 now. That's 3. And then here's 4. I need to learn how to read. Now, when we go to the triple tongue, it's very similar. Okay, and I might do that faster. It depends on how I'm feeling that day. If I'm feeling kind of like impatient, I might play it faster. Let's talk about tempo when you're practicing double tongue, triple tongue. Let's talk about tempo. I think some people make the logical error that double tongue and triple tongue needs to be fast because that's what it's for. But if you think about these things in terms of familiarity, then going fast doesn't help. All going fast does is save you time, but if you haven't mastered it yet, you get no benefit from playing these things fast. Well, the slower you go, the more familiar you become. The faster you go, the less familiar you become. And that's just an aspect of how the brain works. If something whizzes by real fast, you don't notice much detail. You know, the story I used to tell about that, I love to walk long distances. I just enjoy that. I have my whole life. And there was this time when I lived about 14 miles away from the college, and I asked my ex to drop me off at the college, and I would walk home. Now, I walked home the same route that I have always driven. And driving through that area every time, and now walking that area, I noticed probably 100 times more detail walking on that road. There were restaurants and office buildings and decorations and schools and stuff that I never noticed before. But because I'm walking instead of driving, I noticed all of it. And I think that's a great analogy for what we're talking about. When you're practicing the multiple tongue, you get more benefit by being very structured, very deliberate, and slow. So someone who's struggling, I promise you that I would demonstrate what it sounds like if someone's not very good at this. Here's what it would sound like. Now, and when I say that, what I mean is not very good, but practicing correctly. That's an aspect of my teaching. You know, I compliment my students when they practice correctly, even though they haven't mastered it yet. So there's a lot of times when the student will be playing, and I'll say, yes, 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 you did a great job, because what they were trying to do on the practice side of it was finally accomplished. No, they didn't sound good, but how do you get to where you can sound good? You have to practice correctly. When they practice correctly, but it still didn't come out right, at least they've taken that first step towards playing better, because now they're practicing correctly. I hope that makes sense. All right. And I know that sometimes it's hard for people to digest, because I think they assume if you're practicing correctly, then that must mean somehow that you're playing it correctly. That's not true. That's just not true. If you practice correctly, sometimes it doesn't come out right. But you're still practicing correctly. Okay, so here's what it should sound like if you're not good at double tongue, but you're practicing correctly. Now, I want you to notice that the one thing that I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the air is solid. That's the main objective. Remember that everything in this book, all of my routine books, the primary objective is always that the air is steady. The biggest mistake you can make on double tongue and triple tongue is to not push that air through. Now, here's where it gets difficult, right? Because the more you push the air, the more horrible it sounds. And that's why I'm saying, sometimes the students in the lessons, they'll play something that sounds horrendous, and I'll say, yes, 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 you did it right. I'm not saying they played it right. I'm saying they are practicing correctly. We want that air pressure behind the double tongue. That air pressure should never back off. But if you haven't mastered the double tongue yet, if you haven't mastered the triple tongue yet, then that combination of full force air and the lack of mastery of the double tongue should produce some horrendous sounds. And we have a natural tendency to back away from that because it sounds terrible. But that backing away is what's going to cause you to continue to sound terrible. That's the irony of it. Because we back off on the air. So that's what I mean when I say back off. We back off on the air because it sounds terrible. But the fact that we backed off is what's causing it to sound terrible. If you don't push the air through, you will never learn how to double tongue properly. Because the tongue is supposed to float over the top of the air, right? So that airstream should be going through. The air should never come back. Should never be weak. Okay, not in these exercises. So yes, I hope that answers your question. All right. Anybody have any other questions? Anthony says, thank you, Eddie, for your help. Very much appreciated. You're welcome, Anthony. So Javier, if you want, Javier says, I don't know why the routine can sound awful, especially when you are doing a level for the first time. But then the music part of the practice sounds good. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So, the best example of this sounding awful thing, right, is the lip slurs. If you're not good at the lip slurs, but you're doing the air properly, it's the air is what makes it sound so bad. So yes, but if you master the air, in the routine, you know what I kind of compare it to? When you first start playing, there is a phase where you have to fight that desire to breathe. You have to control the body. When you first start playing. Now, I think this was a little easier for me because I used to do a lot of underwater swimming. Okay. But there's a lot of people, and even with that, though, I did have a little bit of a struggle with this. It's just not as much of a struggle as I've seen with my students sometimes. But they have to play this long without breathing, and in order to be able to do that, you have to train yourself to ignore what your body's telling you. Because at first your body's going to think that you're suffocating. You have to train that so that you have control over your body. And I think this thing with the air is sort of the same way, because we have a tendency to pull the air back when it sounds bad. But that's not musical. So if you train yourself on these exercises to keep pushing the air no matter how bad it sounds, then when you sit down to play a piece of music, the air is not going to be a problem in any way. So yes, it sounds like you recognize that phenomenon that I'm talking about here. Karen says, thanks. I hope I can move to sounding better with multiple tone. It's all in the air, really. It's all in the air. And familiarity, right? So double tongue and triple tongue is one of those things that you can do separately from the routine. So if you want to focus, And I consider this musical practice, not exercise practice. So it's not part of that first 50%, it's part of that second 50%. So you can go. So do the exercises that are in the Tyro book during your routine, but then you can get the Arbin. Let me open it up to the double tongue stuff in the Arbin. The Arbin's weird with this, right? Because the Arbin, if I remember right, it's not in the order I would have done it in. I think it puts triple tongue first and then double tongue, or something weird about the order of these exercises. Double tonguing. Yeah, see, there's nothing wrong with after you're done with your routine. Remember, we're talking about familiarity. And if you want your double tongue to sound better, you need to be more familiar with that kind of playing. So there's nothing wrong with after the routine coming to this. And even though this is an exercise, you can approach it as a musical study. And this is number 77 in the Arbin book. You can do this. And what I like to do with the double tongue stuff is just read it down. And yes, you can stop. If you didn't like something, you can work on it a little bit. But if what we're working on is familiarity, so remember I said earlier, that there's ways to practice. Like we were talking about the whole pursuit of perfection, right? There's ways to practice and strive for perfection that can actually make you a worse player because of what it does to your head, because of the frustration and the aggravation and the disappointment. So a lot of times, if what you're striving for is perfection, you might stop and say, "Oh, you don't move on to that next exercise until this one's perfect. What's wrong with you? Don't you have better standards than that?" That's pursuit of perfection. And I do think that's a sort of a trumpet god kind of thing, right? That's the pursuit of perfection, and it's toxic. It really is toxic. If, on the other hand, you are pursuing familiarity, it's actually better to read a bunch of exercises down. So in this case, I think it was number 77, I think, in the book. Finish that one, go to the next one. Finish that one, go to the next one. Finish that one, go to the next one. And you can spend the whole 30 minutes practicing double tongue. And that's 30 minutes of familiarity with playing double tongue. And that to me is far more valuable than this whole perfection thing. The more I teach familiarity, the more toxic I see the perfection thing to be. When I say toxic, I mean toxic to our minds, the way we think. Our progress breaks down because of the pursuit of perfection. I agree with excellence as a standard. That's not the pursuit. You have to differentiate between a pursuit and a standard. A standard says, you know what, I have to, let's say you're going to practice something and, Well, these exercises is a good example. If what you just did is not up to your standard, go ahead and do it again. And if doing it again doesn't get you closer, then maybe break things up. But you're not pursuing perfection. You're just deciding, hey, this is not where I need it to be right now. It's not the same thing as a pursuit. If you pursue instead familiarity. Now, familiarity with terrible playing is going to produce terrible playing. I can agree with that. Yes. So one of the things you want to do always when you're doing double tongue is slow it down so it's not terrible, right? When I first start my beginners off with double tongue, and I do, by the way, you see that in the book. That's the second level. And I have them doing that all the way from their beginning days. But they do it very, very slow. I'm having them do it very, very, very slow like that. And that's for familiarity's sake. We already talked about that though. Javier says, do you have any video or can make a short insight about how you would do it to improve music reading in the most effective way in the daily practice with a cumulative concept? I do have a video about sight reading, I think. Let me look it up. My stance on sight reading is that it's cultural. And once again, listening to music makes you a better sight reader. I guess it's not up there. Let me try a different. Looks like I don't have anything about sight reading. So let me tell you the story that I tell people about sight reading. Now, this doesn't really answer the question, but it gives you a background on why I have the opinion that I do. I was always told in school that salsa was the hardest thing to read. Salsa was the hardest sight reading you could ever do. And about 10 years into my career, I had become so good at reading salsa charts that if the chart was wrong, I still read it right. So I thought, here I am. And I know this is going to sound like I'm contradicting what I told Dennis Dotson. What I said to Dennis was I'm not such a good sight reader. I'm comparing myself to those other guys. And by the way, this is after what happened with this. Okay, so I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that people's ideas and understanding never change. Anyway, so at the time when I was like at the peak of my salsa career, and I could read, we were reading, there's a guy that I think from Chile. I think there's a guy from Chile that we used to buy charts from. All of them were handwritten, and when I first started reading those charts, it was like because the stem was not connected to the flag, and the stem was not connected to the note head, and everything was slanted, and the whole thing looked like calligraphy, not calligraphy, what do you call that? Egyptian hieroglyphics. I'm looking at this music and it looks like hieroglyphics. And when I first started reading that stuff, I couldn't read it. Later, I got so good at reading it that even if there was a mistake in the music, um, but anyway, so I got so good at reading salsa that I thought, hey, I must be that good at playing all styles, or no, I wasn't really thinking that way. It's just that to me, all of the styles were incorporated in that. Right here, I'm playing the hardest style to sight read. So I got called to play with Guy Lombardo. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Guy Lombardo. He was a sort of a jazz band, kind of pre Woody Herman, right? So one of those old fashioned bands. And I actually didn't have a lot of respect for that kind of music at the time. And oh, I'll have to share that with you later. I realize we're out of time right now and I do have to go. So let's start with the sight reading thing next time. Okay, Javier? And but please remind me. We'll talk about sight reading next time, okay? And maybe I'll do a series of videos on sight reading because I do have it's not really a quick answer, okay? All right, I do have to go. God bless you guys. We will see you next time and have a great week, okay? Bye.